I find really interesting to explore. I think there's interesting experiments and examples that are kind of popping up, not at scale, if you will, but that are happening that we can learn
Good.
from.
I think those three words, they are the most important in what we do.
And now
So
you think you've come in and now you're saying, oh, we need to give you back the power. It's like, we had the power already and you took it from us when you came in. Fascinating.
We had initially started this conversation to say, okay, we're calling this thing the sector debrief. But what do we mean by it? Like, okay, to your point, Ali, what reactions did we get from that? And what do we even mean by the sector? At the risk of going into like language, which is always a rabbit hole, what do we mean by the sector today and going forward? And what's the value? What's the utility of having a term that people can broadly understand?
I think we had two or three, and I also received several comments on that. Some are saying the sector stands for what? Others, they are questioning the word sector, and others suggesting different titles. But I really find it funny that we don't have a title. I think we can call it whatever. But I think the interesting part for me is that many times we focus at the language and we forgot the core issue. And I noticed that so many times when I was working with organizations, especially at headquarter level, that we suddenly start focusing at the terminology, and by the end of the day, that's the full attention there. And in general, I'm really not a fan of words like sector, NGO, global south. I don't like nationalization. I don't like these words. I don't like the terminology. But I feel that the moment we start looking at terminology is exactly the same moment we lose our focus on the same issue. So that's why, for me, for example, I don't focus that much at what to call it, because I also believe that there are so many others, they are taking that fight. I am their ally, but I feel like I prefer to focus on other things, like the core things that I think they are the main issue.
I mean,
All
it's
right.
also, I like the sector debrief. We haven't specified which sector.
Yeah.
All we're referring to is some sort of grouping of thematic people, right? But it is an interesting thing. I've been part of another group, and maybe these will converge at some point or I don't know. But last year we got together, and the name of that group, we're calling ourselves the Humanitarian Society, right? Because that doesn't exist in any form apparently. And the first time we started to talk to people about it, the name got challenged, right? Because it was like, what do you mean by humanitarian in this day and age? But also society as a name. We're like, that feels a bit exclusive and a bit elitist and a bit Victorian and archaic in that regard, right? Particularly here in the UK, where you have other sort of royal societies. And we were like, let's not get fixated on the name, right? The concept is what's important. And for that, there might be sort of soft launches coming out soon, but for that, we're looking at human to human connection. And then the bit that really kind of got me intrigued and excited at the beginning of all this was the focus on not just deinstitutionalization, but just this sort of dismissing of institutionalization. We're not here to talk about institutionalized, corporatized aid. We're here to talk about the value side of it. We're here to engage in people, human to human connection, positive, unconditional regard, and that sort of gravitational pull of people who want to engage and have conversations that expand knowledge and awareness, that fulfill that sense of belonging that might be needed. And if through those it can lead to some sort of action, then that's a motivating thing as well. But that action is stemmed from and inspired by like-minded thinking and that sense of camaraderie and belonging, all of which I think has gone from what we are assuming we mean by the sector, right? That's the step we're in.
Yeah, so you're thinking about it like biggest envelope, biggest container, possible. And what I was thinking about it, conversations that I've been having, maybe bringing it down a little bit to a little bit more of the institutional, but stay with me because I'm going to there's a connection here, is I have been making this assumption, and I've been telling this to everyone in all of the sense making that I've done in the last year or so about like kind of where the sector is. I'm saying the old dominant system is crumbling or has crumbled, and that new systems are emerging. I am taking this as an assumption of fact. But I will say it's not based on any sort of evidence. It's based on conversations. It's based on what I'm seeing. It's based on what I'm thinking. And so, one, is that true? And two, if there is no more dominant system, and so there are multiple ways of doing this, in some ways that frees up the term sector because it opens up the container. It can include local, domestic, individuals, anyone who has a people to people connection and wants to do good. It can include um, social enterprises, corporate. It can include all of the things. If that's the case, what is the word that binds all of that together? And how do we know what that is? Like what are the implications? What are the implications for how work gets done, how people see how things happen?
From my perspective, we could call it sector, we could call it ecosystem, we could call it industry. There are so many ways to describe that. But in the end of the day, I think being a humanitarian is not about institution or belonging to an organization or company or a team or whatever. The those who I call real humanitarians, they didn't even belong to an organization. And although I'm living right now in Copenhagen and I spend most of my time in like Copenhagen or other cities that they are not country operations, I meet the humanitarians here every single day. They do basic things. So I think, to be honest, it's not about the institution, as you both said. It's not about um, the label and what we would call it, because we could call, if we want to start digging into that from academic perspective, we could call it so many things. But in the end of the day, humanitarian, I think it's a value and a principle.
There's I completely agree with you. It's the value of humanity, and as you said, I see that taking place every day all around me. The big difference is they don't use the same humanitarian industry-based language around the activities, but the intention and the outcomes are very, very, very aligned. And a few years ago, I did do some academic research and look at this, right? And I came across a political science model that was exploring democracy, right? They did a bit of a study on how democracy, whilst they were sort of initially introduced around the world as either a sort of Westminster parliamentarian model or it was a presidential congressional model like you got in the States, right? Those were the two that went out. But then over sort of observation of democracy around the world, they realize actually it evolves, right? So democracy doesn't stay as parliamentary. Sometimes they fuse and merge together. Sometimes they kind of create their own quasi-democracy type thing, right? But the point of this study was, and it created a word that's one of the most tongue-twisting words I've heard, consolidology, right? Was the word they came up with. Consolidology. And it was because they realized that democracy at the point, this was, I think this study got completed in the early 2000s or late 90s, something like that. Anyway, it realized that democracy was now no longer one of two things. It was the consolidation of multiple different models. And that really started making me think about where we were as an aid sector, because we'd kind of been living through a period of liberal aid, right? I love Michael Barnett's Empire of Humanity, where he frames different eras of aid. And if you haven't read that, really do look at it. It's great. And he basically aligns the current model of aid, or the now old model of aid, with liberal peace and the post-Cold War, World War II era of globalization, multilateralism, etc. And I was realizing, well, that doesn't have the legs, and we're seeing that come to fruition now. And so where are we going next? What does the next era of aid look like? And in my mind, I was like, well, it's going to look like a consolidation of many different things, not the rollout of one. And that to me made me realize the term humanitarianism, it's been hijacked almost by the institutionalized, corporatized multilateral aid
Yes,
sector, right? And it had no right to do that. Not that it went out
yes.
cynically in the beginning to try and do that, right? But I think that the sort of citizens of the world need to kind of just take ownership unapologetically for being a humanitarian. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a home and a belonging and a contract with an NGO or the UN, right? You can be a humanitarian in any walk of life. And that's where I think we'll end up going.
Okay, but so here's my question. I think we all generally agree, but the question that I have is, okay, so what? Because I've been doing a lot of like scenario, for lack of a better word, scenario planning of like, what is the next in 3+ years? What is this going to look like? Because there's so many options, right? And in every scenario, but the most positive one, we're looking at more fracture, right? So more fractured stuff. And again, well, I don't like to parse terminology. If people aren't feeling like they're included in a thing, if they're not part of a movement, if there isn't this feeling of I'm part of something bigger than me, because we don't see ourselves in it, partially because of maybe language, then it's only going to contribute to there being things that are fractured and missed opportunities for alignment and leverage and working together and all these types of things. So my question is the so what? What do we do about it? How
Who
do we
who
move in the right direction?
who are the we in that? Who's the people looking for belonging to something in that?
I would say in your scenario, like from what I'm hearing from you, it's like individual people who are saying, I embody these values. I want to do something. I think there is a real ground swell of people realizing the way society broadly is set up is not natural. It's not working. New Year's doesn't feel like the start of something because it's fake and it's what all of these things, and they're looking for to get back to what is real and connection. And so there's a lot of good people out there that are looking in, to use my language, is trying to regenerate the soil that they are planted in. They're trying to do good in their space, which is all fantastic and all necessary. But to make that a global movement, you need to have some sort of kind of broader connection to the whole. The idea of humanitarianism has been, you know, professionalized, industrialized. Then what?
From my perspective, and the first thing that comes to my mind when you mention this, um, it's merely around the three most important words that we have in the UN Charter, in countries' constitutions, in different countries in different locations, and they are we, the people. Take that, build on it. And regardless, if that's an NGO, if that's a voluntary team, if that's a UN agency, if that's a group of friends, if that's, I think that's what unites us, not only within this sector, but everywhere. Because when I look at US Constitution, India Constitution, so many other countries' constitutions, they start with these three important words. We, the people, UN Charter start with those three important words. I think those three words, they are the most important in what we do. So from my perspective, 2026 and the coming, I don't know how many years, of course, we are evolving. It will be complicated. It's complex system. So I think it will look the same. And part of the way we will evolve is by asking those questions and think about it. And maybe we will not have answers. But I believe when we put those three words as the foundation and build on them, that will be a good way to evolve what we are doing and what we are thinking about.
I'm with you. I'm with you both, but I'm also not at the same time. So I I met a woman last year in Somerset, where I am now, right? She's just a therapist by trade and profession. but she had a desire. She observed that there was the beginnings of a breakdown in community resilience across the county. And this is not a deprived part of the world, right? It's got its pockets of economic deprivation, but in the scheme of things, it's not a deprived part of the world. And so she set about kind of, well, what can we do to help change that? And she created a theory of change and she presented it to me. And I was like, this is brilliant. But it's so echoed projects that I've been supporting and working with in South Sudan, in Somalia, etc., where the crux of what she wants to do is she basically wants to raise money, whether that's through profit share, whether that's through grants, whether that's through philanthropy, angel investors, what have you. And she wants to then create that chest, she's calling it community chest, and she wants local organizations, local communities, local people to have a participatory role in how that money is spent, right? And I'm like, how much do we do that? How much is that central in almost every sort of localization-based conversation? And she set about trying to exercise this, and I'm trying to give her some help with it. But she's exercising the value of humanity, right? And she's got this sense of belonging to something because she's got a sense of belonging to the county, to various different networks. She's creating a network. She's got partnerships with another woman who's heavily invested in trying to provide support to the construction industry to prevent male suicide in the construction trade, right? And so they're looking to see if that's a case study that they can test it on. And for me, it opens up this question mark around the need for the global movement that you're talking about, Kim, right? I think there's moving forward, what we're going to end up with are every part of the world exists as ecosystems within ecosystems, and there's levels of need and there's levels of gap in provision against those needs. And in certain parts of the world, at certain points in time, there's likely to be the need for whatever the incarnation is of the aid sector as we've sort of formally known it. But that incarnation will need to be adaptable, much more adaptable to the gaps of provision that exist in the different parts of the world, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter model that primarily is geared against globally aggregatable data to meet a Western donor ODA sort of requirement. That's gone. So we no longer have the shackles of ODA now to build around. So let's build or reincarnate something that's a lot more agile, a lot more adaptable, and a lot more able to work where it's needed, as opposed to the steam train that comes in, right? I'm also doing fascinating work with Ukrainian civil society at the minute, and they've got the same story about multilateral aid coming in as a steam train, and they're like, well, where's our voice? We had it before, and now you think you've come in and now you're saying, oh, we need to give you back the power. It's like, we had the power already, and you took it from us when you came in. Fascinating.
Okay, so my brain is going in like 6 different places, which is why my
I
face
covered a
looks
lot
like
there. Sorry.
which is why my face looks like this. So my first thought was 100%. Like that last year, I was getting so into the idea of networks. Like I'm now convinced this is the way. It's like an elegant way to explain, I think, where I had struggled with locally led development before, where it's like you can have local networks that make sense in Somerset or make sense in wherever, and you have contextualized ways of doing things, but then the networks connect so that there's cross learning, right? And there's broader global connection, and that is more of a bottom up type than the traditional like top down. That I think I find really interesting to explore. I think there's interesting experiments and examples that are kind of popping up, not at scale, if you will, but that are happening that we can learn from. But the second piece where you're saying ODA is gone, formal aid is gone, what we need is effectively like a mobilization force where it's like pockets of need are identified and then they go in and they support. How? That's, I mean, to your point, Ali, like it's a system and systems are complex. So how do you move from here to there in a way that reduces harm in the transition? Because I'm all in this like transition, bridge and build space. This is like this year and the next couple of years is going to be bridge and build.
This is where I
I
think there's an
think,
incompatibility. I don't think we can do it with no harm.
Reduced harm. Sure.
As minimal, we can mitigate to the absolute possible degree, but we will not be able to do it without any harm. And I fear that in trying to do it with no harm, we'll end up just perpetuating what we've always done. We're going to stifle any creativity about creating a new, because we'll be stuck doing what we've always done, and we still won't reduce the harm. The harm will happen anyway, right? And we just won't be able to move forward into something different. And in terms of what it looks like and the how, I mean, this is the tough choice that the executive leaders of INGOs, of national local NGOs, and UN agencies are going to be forced to carry at the minute. Is you got to choose to stop doing stuff, right? You can't do development, humanitarian, and public advocacy for rights-based agendas, be the beginning, middle, and end of the supply chain, and all in one go, right? So what are you going to do, and what are you not going to do? What are you going to let go of? Which is another topic we said we'd talk about today, wasn't it? Like letting go.
All roads lead back to leadership behavior analysis paralysis. Ali, go ahead.
but from what I am seeing in 2024, 5, and this month, internally within this ecosystem, more people are questioning how we do things, more people want change, more people are breaking things. Externally, there is public pressure, and I think we might go into institutional shock at some point, not only because of funding cuts and access constraints and all that, but because the public will question the reputation of those institutions. And look how many people within this ecosystem or this sector been questioning not only international NGOs, but also UN agencies, and asking if they are still committed to the principles and the values and so many other things. So I think one of the things that will pressure this system to change is the institutional shock that will come from the public and from within this system. There is one thing I noticed in the United States, UK, they are those, what they call them, citizen journalism. They are opening files. They are trying to go and they are doing the monitoring and evaluation in an indirect way. They are putting us under the spotlight. They are asking, where's the money going? What's the percentage, the impact, and all that. And the thing is that in those two countries, the main reason why I mentioned them, because the laws give you that power to go and act on behalf of the government and the taxpayers. And I could see that now growing also in Brussels and EU. So I think the public will start holding us accountable. It will cause harm to those institutions, but on the long run, I think it's going to pressure us to change. That's the external pressure. The internal one, we are part of it, and there are many trying to do that.
The biggest question mark I have, I'm pretty convinced in what I've said about the way moving forward, it's going to be consolidation of small rather than rollout of big and all the rest. But the big question mark I have, or two big question marks I have that I can't resolve in my own mind, are one, how does human rights survive? I don't know that the institutionalized legal frameworks are gonna stand up. That's a huge risk I see, and that's going to need a lot of intentional leaders choosing to prioritize the support for those. So that's one that I worry about a lot. And the other is how does anything happen at scale, right? At this point in time, moving forward, and I don't have an answer to that in how things are going to move forward, and I don't know that anyone can at this point. And I'm not
Say
sure
more about
that,
the scale bit.
so the combination of small, right? It works when it's organic, it works when there is a sort of power shift, so that actually decision makers are in the local areas and they can then go and use their own networks and their own ecosystems. And that's the sign of resilience within the structure, within the community systems, as to whether or not they can get, when a shock happens that overwhelms that, right, whatever that shock might be, whether it's a fairly sort of clean cut earthquake type shock, or whether it's a bit more of a economic catastrophe, or some sort of political destabilization, what have you, where does the mobilization of scale come from? Because that's where the multilateral aid sector has helped in the past, and I do believe that they'll be able to support that a little bit moving forward. But it will only be where Western ODA find that politically acceptable to support and go to scale at, right? So in parts of the world where it's not part of a political foreign policy agenda, where does the scale come from, and where does it come from quickly? I don't know.
Because of also the erosion of the humanitarian principles.
Yes. And that unification and that ability to be able to mobilize for territories anywhere in the world. Yeah.
That's a good question.
Right, because you need both, right? You need individual humanitarians who are working in their communities and are the bedrock of everything. And then you need at the organizational, the ecosystem, the sector, the system level, you need structures in place that uphold that and that are frameworks. So, I mean, I think we're all kind of talking about a future where this frameworks are less rigid and maybe more adaptable, but we're not saying like get rid of all frameworks, get rid of all structures, because that's a recipe for chaos and anarchy.
Yeah.
So it's rebalancing of it, and I really take your point, Thomas, and we'll think about this, which is it has to break, or it's just going to be basically a performative wallpapering over of the old system. And so, but some things are they too important to break? Like if you break the idea of humanitarian principles, then what are you letting loose while you rebuild something?
That's a Pandora's box. The four humanitarian principles are in tension with each other already. They have been since inception, right? So I don't know that. I mean, and there's been a debate about whether we reform humanitarian principles or not. I don't know that we need to reform them. I do think we need to reorientate our relationship to them, right? I think there's two very political based principles, there's two very operational based principles. And I think take the operational ones and turn those into just sort of part of the decision making process. The political ones, we can start, I don't know, be the basis, be the instigator, be that little spark that triggers actual engagement in politics, which is something we freaking hate. We shied away from that for years, but engage politically in the politics of humanity, as Hugo Slim puts it, right? Now, does that need to? What I don't think needs to happen, sorry, is that every act of humanity has to be done through the lens and the eyes of humanitarian principles. I think we can let go of that, right?
Yeah. One thing is not fully relevant to this, but it came to my mind when you mentioned the activities, and later came when you also talked about the type of the networks and all that. A humanitarian diplomacy, we don't talk about it that much. We are actually good at it. Like when I was in country operations and doing program director or chief of party, large portion of what I was doing is a humanitarian diplomacy. When you engage with those policymakers, diplomats, negotiate access and all that. And we are very, very good at it. So I think maybe that's one of the things that, especially the international actors, they could explore further, because country directors are humanitarian diplomats, head of programs or head of operations, they are humanitarian diplomats. And maybe that will be a way to break that dependency and break that complex or something like that. I really think we should explore that further.
Hmm.
Especially that, I mean, under foreign policy and soft power, many countries and institutions giving money to organizations, indirect way to implement that foreign policy as part of soft power. So technically, it is a diplomatic move. So if we play that strong element of humanitarian diplomacy, could be there around the table to negotiate in better ways, navigate the humanitarian principles and the dilemmas that come with neutrality in better ways, have stronger relations to institutions, and maybe in a way or another we play a role that fits for purpose in a different way beyond the classic program design. I don't know. I'm just speaking and thinking out loud.
You're thinking, Thomas.
I am thinking. Exactly what I'm doing. My thinking face.
My thinking face.
What I'm thinking about is the barriers to all this, right? From a psychological leadership behavior perspective, right? Because I like what you're saying, Ali. I had in my mind, I don't know if this is what you meant or whether it will go this far, but I had in my mind like humanitarian embassies in different places, right? And you've got entire entities and where they're housed, I don't know, but yeah, you've got an embassy that basically is there to uphold humanity. UN would probably advocate that they are that already.
That's what I was just thinking. I'm like, isn't that the intent behind the UN? Like, if you strip it all back.
But then I was thinking, well, kind of, if you've got a CEO or you've got someone high up in OCHA, and they're listening to this, and they'll be like, well, yeah, we get that, and we understand, but help us with the next. What's the sort of mental block that they've got to actioning anything or to taking those leaps of faith that's required here, right? One's a sense of responsibility, for sure. I get that, right? There's a huge responsibility institutionally, staff, existing programming, existing recipients and end users of the aid and all the rest of it. There's a big responsibility there. There's a legacy responsibility, I guess, and there's a kind of pressure of the brand, and what does the brand mean and do, which is one that I imagine they're holding in tension, because they won't want this moment under their custodianship to be the moment that it completely collapses. But then there'll be pressure from a board, and majority of boards of the big INGOs and UN are all sort of very westernized, and despite attempts of DEI to diversify, the mindset and the priorities of the boards are still very much sort of corporate, fiscally driven. No one wants to see financial reduction. And yet there is the need, an acknowledged need at that level, to do things differently. But they can't also make those decisions independently and unilaterally. They've got to do it through consultation with their organizations. And suddenly you then get into the point where the staffing bodies that remain don't want to lose what they've done. They're fatigued with change. They don't know what the new could be. So if they're asked, they will probably just come up with a sort of version of what they're currently doing. And they ultimately don't really want to bother with a new change. They want to just get back to doing the job, right? And then there's exhaustion and trauma put on top of that over the last couple of years. So there's a huge set of challenges and problems that leaders are going to need. And I can't help but think just a lot of depth reflection on their own part around what's their true North Star morality compass telling them. And they need a safe space. Are they talking to each other would be my first question. Right. I don't know that there is any closed group forum where CEOs are all coming together and going, what the fuck do we do? Because
I mean, there are many forums.
Yeah, but are they having those real honest conversations, right? To your point about what this podcast is, right? It's not the pre-prepared, scripted, guarded.
I have real honest conversations with people all the time. They're usually one or two levels down.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, I'm talking about the David Miliband's, the Ingers of Save, the Michelle Care, like those individuals. Are they speaking to each other and having a conversation and going, how do we get through this and what do we do together?
Yeah. You know what we should do? We should start inviting CEOs to the podcast and speak with them about those. We'll not share the questions ahead of time, and then we have a conversation.
Do we do this like the blind
I think we
dating
should.
thing? Do we invite them all individually, but suddenly they all turn up together?
I mean,
Premise
you
is,
know, we
and the
are
starting
exploring.
point is, no one knows anything.
Yeah.
No one
Yes,
has a clue. We're all figuring this out. If we all start there, then we can only go up. Listen,
and
this is
and
why I feel a little bit this idea of having multiple future or multiple strands of like emergent systems is actually hopeful for me because it means that there's not a monolith right way to do something. Like there are going to
Yeah,
be some that just kind
absolutely.
of struggle on. There are going to be some that break, but it doesn't mean you have to break the whole thing. And there are going to be some kind of like new things that are emerging that are just like fresh and new and cool. And maybe that and that's just we're going to have to be okay living in all of that. And so like that way the whole system isn't being broken at once. It's just like pieces of it are being fractured and put together. My question at the start of this was, what's the container that can hold all of that? That's big enough. And one of the article that I was telling you guys earlier from Jess Blitchkers, and I'm sorry, Jess, if I'm saying your name wrong. She's saying, and she wrote this like last year, but I keep going back to it. She's saying when words like the international development sector stopped making sense and we became an international solidarity movement, like, is
mm,
that big enough to hold us all? The formal, the systems, the individuals, the different strands.
What's the purpose of this big container?
Well, part of me likes frameworks, and so I can understand the big picture. But a lot of me feels like if you can't, if you there's real value in grassroots organic movement. But as you said, in order to scale where scale is necessary and useful, you need to have a big picture and container. And if not, then things become fragmented.
I like the term container because I use it from a psychodynamic point of view, right? A container is that ability to be able to express feeling, emotion, reaction, and have it held, have it and a co-regulation, a processing of it that then helps in a constructive way, right? So there's a cathartism to that, which is, I guess, why I'm suggesting CEOs talk to each other without anyone knowing about it, right? Because I think they'll get a lot of catharticism and therapy
I mean, I'm
from
sure they are
talking
one
to
on
each other.
one. I mean, they all know each other. Not all of them, but many
yeah,
of them.
I hope they are, and I hope it's helpful for them.
I think we should invite some CEOs and have those conversations with them. I think it
You,
would be good for everyone.
talking about CEOs and invitations, possibly. You wanted to talk about Oxfam.
Yeah, I think it's not really only their case, it's just an observation. The reputational risk is growing, and I see that in 2026. And this is one of the symptoms. And in this case, I think it came internally. This agreement between the board, the CEO or the executive, and part of the employees or something like that. I don't have full details, but I could see similar case with other organizations. I also see that international NGOs, at least those who I see they are trying to do reputational management by either bringing a board member to focus at the branding or bringing more people into communication, marketing, branding, and all that. And I know firsthand that part of the enterprise risks for the majority of international NGOs now is the reputation. So I really think it's one area worth looking at because the damage there will extend to the public. And when that thing happens, I think we will have an issue that is very, very hard to deal with. And this is starting internally, not even externally, because externally there are so many things where non-governmental organizations are being considered part of a political party or a political movement or the extension of it or something like that. But I'm saying those internal conflicts going out to the public, turning into reputational risks that would harm not only the organization, but the people that we are trying to support at country level.
I mean, you're talking about there was an article late last year, wasn't there, where there was an open letter written by staff in disagreement to the Oxfam leadership direction of travel, and it went to the board as well. And I know in 2024 there were very public versions of similar dynamics for Save the Children, at least 2 or 3 times, and IRC had it as well. Just speaking a little bit from sort of experience, there's a protect the brand type mindset, right? So when you say reputational risk, what do you see the reputational risk being, and what harm would that cause?
I think there are so many things, and we are seeing examples of that. One is the political alignment with organizations aligned with a certain political party. 2 is fraud and waste. 3, the bureaucracy. And 4, many people asking, where are the donations going? The public is asking those questions, but also, of course, there are political dynamics there. There are so many other things, but I think what happened, at least internally, I'm not talking externally, that organizations with very good intention, they wanted to make transformation or change, but the communication and the change fitness, they were not good enough. And then they ended up either changing a structure, terminating employees, or having this organizational institutional shock in a way that affected employees, and at the same time didn't create a healthy culture. Some people reacted and they were whistleblowers or went to the public. Other they stayed silent, but they suffered in silence. And many others are still struggling. And I want to add to that every single person I know looking for a job or in job hunting mood is complaining and not happy with the recruitment practices, because they feel disrespected, they feel ghosted, they feel ignored, they feel disvalued. All those accumulated issues between the way the change happened, the lack of communication, the unhealthy, toxic environment, the disrespect in recruitment, and add to that the bureaucracy, the delays, and so many others. There are small things accumulating on top of each other, and they start going to the public and they start exploding. And again, in countries like the US and UK, now more citizens, they are going to dig deeper. Add to that, I have seen several podcasts in Africa also with questions around that. In Middle East now, it's day-to-day conversations. But I think we have to be careful, because the good intention is not enough. I think we have very good way at least now trying to bring a vision. We are getting there, but we have a failure in implementation.
The broader topic of good intentions and the process of change and the importance of living your values in frankly very stressful and like layered, like the layers of pressure in this process. But what is the impact? What is the impact of doing it well and not doing it well, both in terms of service delivery but also in terms of the public narrative, which is, as what you're saying, is very much in the public eye. So it's bigger than one organization. It's how we do this transition in one of those, let's say, strands. And that's the world that I live in. I have many thoughts on it.
What are your thoughts?
I don't know. Do we have time? Do we have time? Or do we want to put a pin in it for next time?
How long have we been recording for? Probably about 45 minutes, I think.
Where is the
There's one point I've got going around my head in this whole conversation. That's about transparency, right? And I don't know where I sit on this sort of public airing of tension between staff and leadership. I don't think we ever get the whole story when you see it. I certainly think there's misunderstood leadership decisions that are in there. I think you've got a lot of emotion and passion and hurt coming through with staff when they do that. But clearly, to get to the point where that needs to happen, there's clearly a breakdown of communication internally, and that's something that needs to be addressed. But I don't know. I kind of think it serves a valuable purpose at times, right? It might not feel like it in the moment, but retrospectively, there's a lot of learning that can be done from it. There's a lot of takeaways, and there's a lot of honesty that can probably be gleaned if people want to look for it. Which brings me back to leadership behaviors, and are people being honest with themselves? Are they listening to internal narratives, or is the survival brain the one driving the thinking, and it's driving defensive aggression because that's the safety space? Go back to what we've always done, repeat the ways we've navigated tension in the past, or repeat the way that we've navigated challenge and restriction and structural change in the past, because that's what we know.
But it's both sides, isn't it? It's a double-edged. So in my mind, transparency is a double-edged sword, and it's easy to say we believe in honesty and transparency. I've seen so many ways that it backfires,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And it's on both sides. It's both in how the transparency is communicated. I've heard many senior leaders say we want to be transparent, but sometimes I'm too transparent, and
it
then
gets thrown in their face.
and then it's not, the context isn't there, the understanding, because it's a two-way street where the other
100%.
person has to receive it in such a way, and you're always receiving it with filters.
Yeah.
So it's a very fine line to walk. And I'm not saying that in any case for this particular circumstance, because I don't know, but I'm saying broadly from a leadership perspective, walking the line of honesty and transparency in a way that's productive and kind of meets the intent is a hard thing to do. And the only thing I can say is it's starting with the assumption that like we're probably going to mess it up at some point. And then it's usually a good place to start.
There's one senior leader, I won't name them, but they had a saying, it's cock up, not conspiracy, right?
It's usually the case, isn't it?
And it's, yeah, okay, we screwed that one up, didn't we? But the staff said, see, I told you they were up against it, they were going to.
But in some ways, isn't that's probably the most likely answer than like this
100%.
massive conspiracy.
All the time. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah.
All right, here's my question, because I feel like we had an interesting conversation, but I want your help me to pull the threads together. What did we talk about in the last hour? What was the through line?
We meandered our way across.
What did you learn, or what are you taking away differently?
I'm going to do something. I started doing it this year. To take pictures using this one
I love that.
while we are thinking.
I've taken away the fact that we all need to have a little bit more humility. And when I mentioned the sort of opportunity for honesty a second ago, I wasn't necessarily referring to sort of outward communication honesty. It's not the outer self and that performative person that I was thinking about. It's the internal person and that narrative that everyone has in their own heads. How honest are we letting that narrative get? How much are we listening to that voice? And are people in the frame of mind where they're calm, where they're rational enough to be able to let the cognitive brain process a lot of those honest reflections and use them? Now, either they do that on their own internally, or they get external help in order to do that. They find that emotional container to be able to help make sense of all this. But crucially, it's about making the cognitive brain at the front be the one that's driving the conversation and the thought process. It's not the sort of survival brain of, no, this is what we've got to do, and panic stations and emergency and fatigue and exhaustion and repeat what we've done before because that will get us through, blah, 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 right? Stop, pause, and let that internal narrative work and have the front brain focusing on the decisions, because that's the only way creativity and curiosity is going to emerge, which is what's needed. Right?
Ali, what do you think?
For me, it's I really like when I have more questions, and today we had extra questions on how this global movement will look like, and the things around what to call it, and how we can make it operational, and that conversation between executives and the board, and then middle management, and all that. I really don't think we need, or at least I'm not trying to look for answers. I'm just trying to find good questions, and those questions we had today, they are very good. One thing I've been telling my friends about is that as long as we have curiosity within what we are trying to do, we are okay. Because the moment we stop being curious, that's a big problem. And I feel all those conversations, they make me, and the feedback I received on our first episode, they make more people curious. So I think that's a very good positive thing.
Take that as a
So-
win. Yeah.
And one thing that you've made me question, I think, which is a good thing, is, well, two things actually. The first is, Thomas, you keep asking me, well, why do we need to have a global movement? Why do we need to have this big container? And it's just something that I've taken for granted. And the systems brain part of me takes for granted that everything can be tied up in a nice little bow if you try hard enough. And I don't know, I'm gonna have to sit with that for a little while. It makes me uncomfortable in a good way. But also along those lines, the idea that we need to accept that there's no way out of this without breaking something, and that there will be damage. And actually, if we don't accept that, we may be doing more harm than good, is a very complex question or statement to sit with. And I don't have anything more eloquent to say other than that, I guess.
Okay.
But with that, we'll hope people are curious if they're listening still.
What other questions are there?
Well,
would be
send them
great.
through. We'll chat about whatever people want us to if they've got opinions. If not, we're not short of subject matter ourselves, are we?
Love it.
Excellent. Cool.
All right.
I'll see you both
And we
soon.
continue without the
Yeah.
name.
For now. Why not?
Okay.
Take care, bye.
Bye, all.
Bye.